Good afternoon, Island Council members and members of the Central Committee, Vito Charles, Saskia Matthew, Julio Everett, Island Registrar, Ms. Akila Levinstone, Island Governor and Chairman of the Island Council, Johnson Johnson, members of the Executive Council, Commissioner Everton Haleger and Commissioner Bruce Sagers, Island Secretary, civil servants, and to the general public, whether here today or viewing via live stream. Welcome to the Central Committee meeting of Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. Before going into the agenda points, allow me to mention the absence of Island Council member Orlando Wilson, who is absent with notice. Today we have 8 points on the agenda. Point 1 was the opening. We now move on to agenda point 2, which is the approval of the agenda. I now look to the council members for approval. We now move on to agenda point 3, approval of the minutes from the Public Central Committee meeting of October 22nd, 2024. I now look to the council members for approval. We now move on to agenda point 4, citizens' right to speak on agenda points with prior announcement. I was informed that no requests by inhabitants have been received. We can therefore move on to the next agenda point. We now move on to agenda point number 5, which is the question round concerning announced or flag questions from incoming correspondence list from September 11th to October 14th, 2024. In line with Article 18 of the Rules of Procedure from the Island Council meeting. So we first have the Island Council incoming and outgoing correspondence list from September 11th to October 14th, 2024. In this part, we have 3 points. The first 2 are actually mine, so I will first allow the third point, who I believe is Island Council member Charles. I will first allow you to do your point in this category.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The technical aspects.
And this agenda point that Mr. Charles will speak about is incoming correspondence of Theodore Johnson, destruction of monumental buildings on Saba from October 1st, 2024.
Thank you, Ms. Mancelli, once again. My question is in regards to the legal letter of Ms. Theodore Johnson, which regarding the destruction of monumental buildings in Saba. And in the letter, it indicates that the destruction of a monument in Saba. In the last meeting, it was mentioned that a committee is being established to address this issue. And I just wanted to ask the Executive Council if they had any developments since the last meeting.
Thank you, Council Member Charles. Yes, the answer to your question is the work group continues to meet together with the National Heritage Agency, RCE, and have drafted an action plan which includes the establishment of a Monuments Committee. The idea is to establish the committee during the beginning of 2025, Q1, the first quarter of the year. We are also working on mapping the villages and using the short list of monuments that have been floating around. The first drafts of these maps have been made by the Rijkstrain at the Planning Bureau.
Thank you. I'm just curious, because the committee is supposed to submit a report and the report is supposed to be sent out to the Island Council as well. I'm just curious, when do you expect the first report of that committee? When can we expect the first report of that committee?
I will reach out to them and get back to you with plans.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Island Council member Charles, and thank you, Commissioner Haleger. We'll now move on to the next point, which was mine that I flagged, and it was the Public Health Department SMK Research, Public Health and Safety, And I will also then go straight into my second point, which was Ms. Christina Woodley Charles or Dr. Sylvia.
Just a point of clarification. The point that Charles brought up about the question. Can we ask questions, follow-up questions on that?
You have a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Okay, then first let's continue.
Yeah. No, I just, in light of what happened actually with the monument, the destruction of the monument, was there, and what was the steps that was taken after that? So in terms of, let's just say that it's not going to happen again. Was there a stop, immediate stop to, if anyone is going to, let's say, destroy or demolish any structures from this point on, what is that process?
Well, at the moment, the rights trainee is busy working on putting together a process to stop it. Well, not really to stop it, but a process of where applications will be sent in for buildings will be inspected.
There's something in place. All right.
Yeah.
If I can just add something to that, you know, there's a committee that's doing work onto it, but you know, there's also something that I think takes it to another level. That's when we have a spatial development plan, and you know that further outlines, you know, properties that have to be protected, where not certain buildings can be built or certain businesses can be established. So you know, I think that makes, you know, what happened there with that one monument a bit more certain once the spatial development plan is filed.
Okay, that's good.
Have a follow-up question?
I just want to point out maybe. I thought it just occurred to me because recently I was reading the newspaper that PCN, who had contracted for the demolition of that building, has actually, you know, they funded rehabilitation and renovation of a historical monument in St. Station. So it's rather hypocritical to see that on one island you are preserving the physical heritage of one island, and then there's a destruction of another island. So I think it's important that we do have, like the Commissioner mentioned, that we do have procedures and regulations in place to prevent the demolition, but also to ensure the preservation of heritage.
If I may, to add, officially that building was, because there was a list made when Island Council member Wilson was a commissioner, even before that when he was an Island Council member. So there was a list made, but there was never an approval of marketing buildings as monuments. So we're using the word that it was a monument, I mean in loose terms, but it was a monument, but officially it was not a monument. What transpired with the contractor and with the pension funds and the planning bureau were in contact, and what transpired, so they were negotiating about the wood aspects of the building and removing that, and then what transpired was on a Sunday the contractor interpreted the email of the pension funds incorrectly, and on the Sunday he started to demolish. So the pension funds took steps with that contractor. So nothing was ever approved or a go-ahead was made with the contractor to proceed with the demolition. So also for the pension fund, they were also, you know, unpleasantly surprised what was taking place, and they did, you know, bring this to our attention because, like I said, it happened on a Sunday, and Monday right away. We were in touch with them, they were in touch with us, but they, you know, didn't like how that happened because, so they also took steps for that person that they were looking for bids to see how to proceed, and that particular contractor went ahead and did that. So those, I just wanted to clarify those things as well.
I think, thank you for the clarification.
So there's more to it than, you know, than that.
Thank you for the clarification, but me, Chair. I think because it brings up another point that, because I asked the Commissioner if he could indicate when the minus list will be ready for. So I think now that brings it a level, increase the level of urgency to establish that monument list. So maybe we can ask that by maybe the middle of next year that there is a monument list up for approval.
Yeah. So
that that this sort of destruction doesn't occur. And then because you indicated that the pension funds was not in agreement with the destruction, the question is, what are they going to do now to?
No, to restore, yeah,
Restore.
like you were saying on the other island. But at the same time, there are things taking place at the site, which, happens in the day or the night or whatever, but day by day, rocks from that area is disappearing. So there are people who are probably seeing those rocks. I mean, I know of other buildings in the winter side that could have been considered or marked as historical. And every day, people would take one by one rocks, the cut rocks, what they call it, the face rocks. And those are in people's yards now that used to be part of a foundation of a house. So that is also if you know when you drive down there, you'll see that you saw the wall used to be one section, and now it's like keeping. And then you see a few rocks sticking out here and a few rocks there. So our own people here are also making misuse of that as well. You can see we're gonna hang up cameras or whatever, but people are taking it upon themselves as well. So I don't know. Maybe we should be in touch with the pension funds to see how they go to secure the property, request permission to put cameras on their private property. It is private. And then they can see who's taking the face rocks, because they are going one by one. And that has taken place in other villages as well. It's taking place here as well.
That's right.
So I want to add that as well.
These are disappointing to hear that. I just want to ask to follow up on your commitment to have the minuses ready for next year, mid-year.
It's possible.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there any more questions at this time concerning this? Good. Okay. So we'll go on to the next point. The first one was about the CMK research by Public Health. And I particularly flagged some things in this because after reading the social marketing research, I see that it touches on some very concerning topics. And for some context, the report highlights stigma as a barrier to mental health, support and domestic violence as a significant underreported issue despite Saba's reputation for safety. And you will find this on pages 7, 8, and 29. So my questions are, how does the Executive Council plan to prioritize and address the key findings of this report, particularly the stigma surrounding mental health and the hidden culture of domestic violence, to create tangible improvements for Saba's residents? And my next question is, what plans are in place to address the shortage of mental health professionals on Saba? And I'll make a reference to the research, and I quote, currently there are only 2 psychologists who are flown in from St. Martin and they cannot meet the demand of the island. And you can find this on page 26. And finally, I would just like to ask if we could also request an information market for this report, because I don't believe we have one on it. And that would be it for this point.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the answer to your first question is that as Commissioner of Social Domain, I agree with you that it is very important to be open when it comes to mental health on the island. The stigma surrounding mental health and the hidden culture of domestic violence are topics that will be addressed. To start with your first question about the follow-up of the report, I would like to share with you and our community that a meeting has been scheduled for next week to go over the outcomes internally first and see how we can bring all our community stakeholders together to address the key issues that were brought forward in the research. This will take place in the first quarter of 2025. You as our Island Council will also be informed when we have a concept in an information market. And after that, we will communicate our plans to the wider public. The stakeholders that are currently in our scope are, but not limited to, Mental Health Caribbean, Saba Cares, Community Development and Culture Department, Public Health and Sports Department, and our Department for Safety. And to answer question 2, the research is a qualitative research meaning that the research provides the views of the respondents instead of fact-based statistics and quantitative research. The quote highlighted from one respondent on page 26 therefore cannot be seen out of the research context and doesn't necessarily mean that there is a shortage of mental health professionals on Saba. Although in the follow-up of the research, there are stakeholder meetings planned to address the research results, and the number of mental health professionals available will be one of the topics.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just to confirm, so that we would receive an information market in the first quarter of next year?
That's correct.
Okay. And could you confirm, if you can at this moment, how many, what's the staff of mental health Caribbean currently on the island? Is it still just one? And then they use persons from overseas, or how exactly is staff formation right now?
I will get back to you on this question.
All right, thank you. Is there any more questions to this, Mr. Johnson?
Just curious, because, I mean, so in the report, and I'm trying to speak the qualitative and quantitative aspect of it, but in the report, I mean, they make some interesting statements. And I'm just curious how we interpret it, because, for instance, the fact that they seem to lack in the highlights, so I don't know who the individual was that mentioned the lack of psychologists. But for instance, I have heard from persons who are interested in counseling that they don't, it's not possible for them to access the counseling that they would prefer. In fact, I have had a discussion with, I guess, the person who's in charge on these islands, and there seems to be a mismatch or difference of understanding, because they're saying that there's sufficient capacity, but people are saying that they can't access the capacity. So I'm just curious as well how we look at getting people in touch with the organization, because it seems like people also don't know how to find their way there. And also, you know, maybe there might be, for instance, children's family therapy, maybe different type of therapy that people would like, but they are unable to access. So I think that's something we have to take into consideration as well, because the ability to share your concerns, to have them responded to by a professional, I think is something that's important and would help improve the quality of life for many of our residents here. So I think we definitely have a role to play in ensuring that there's more access to these services.
Did anyone else have any questions? No? Okay, then this concludes this point. I will now move on to the next agenda point, which was in October we received an email from Ms. Christina Woodley Charles concerning a proposal to honor Rebecca Livingstone's legacy and address the road agreement concerns. So based on this, I have the following questions. Was an official response ever provided to Ms. Woodley Charles by the Executive Council regarding her concerns? If so, could you please share the details or your perspective on this matter? And also, can the Executive Council confirm whether there is an existing process for naming roads on the island for particular requests such as this? If such a process exists, how can a proposal like naming the road Rebecca's Lane be formally submitted for consideration? And also, would it be feasible to coordinate the naming of the road with the upcoming 58th Saba Day celebration in 2025 to honor this historic and iconic figure's contribution? And what steps are necessary to ensure that this can be achieved in time for this event? And furthermore, I would also like to know if this is a wish of the Executive Council. Can the Executive Council also verify the existence of an agreement between the island government and the family regarding the construction of a retaining wall? And if such an agreement was made, why has it not yet been fulfilled? And my final question is, what immediate actions can be taken to assess and address the erosion of the land referenced in the letter, given its potential impact on the family's property and safety? And that concludes my questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairlady. Admittedly, this didn't There goes the car. Should we continue or?
Nicholas is still there? Oh yeah, you can continue.
Okay. When this email was received, it didn't necessarily follow the formal channels, and for whatever reason, it never officially got booked in and got processed. It was sent to individual emails, and normally someone would flag it and send it to one of the secretaries to have it booked in. And this was not the case, and that's regretful that it didn't happen. But it does have our attention. I will, however, try to address your questions because those are regular questions that we can answer today. With regards to the actual naming of the street, that's something that I think, like I mentioned earlier about the monuments, that's something that is further regulated in spatial planning. I do, however, feel because of the historical nature and the impact that this lady had on the cultural heritage of Saba, this is something that we should look at a bit differently, and perhaps we can organize a work group that can have a discussion to see if this should be the route that's taken, especially considering that we are celebrating 50 years of Saba Day next year in December. So I do think that would be a nice gesture to honor her contributions to Saba. As for the retaining wall and whatever agreement had been made at that time, what I derived from at least the email that was sent was that this was an agreement made back when the road was being built. I can't necessarily say when that road was being built or which administration was in place at that point in time, but that's something that we would have to do some research to see what really exists, if indeed something does exist. And then for the immediate actions, we can ensure that the relevant departments goes there to see if there's what type of how bad the damage is, what sort of action needs to be taken. So that's something that can also be checked by the Planning Bureau and Public Works.
Okay, thank you. For me, I think your responses are a bit clear, so I don't have any follow-ups, but do any of you have a follow-up question? You can go.
Yeah, my question is more along the lines of, well, a few months ago we did pass a motion in here into a structured way of naming places after individuals on the island. And so my question ties in actually to this point, since it's relative, that, how far along is that motion? Because I think if we have that, we get that going, we can actually make the amendments in the law, and actually then, that was the whole purpose of the motion, so.
Well, that's still being worked on. I don't have a definitive answer onto that, but it is being worked on.
Are there any more questions? We'll now move on to agenda point 5.2, which was executive council decision list. And there we have 3 points. The first one was of August 27, 3.0.4, invasive species control measures. And I believe that was also Mr. Charles.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you. Basically, in that point, it's clear the budget is being allocated for different species control measures, and but it's not clear what these measures will be. Interested in hearing from the Executive Council, what would these measures entail?
Okay, thank you. Well, the program is aimed towards 3 different species. Namely the green iguanas, which is an invasive iguana to our black iguana, feral cats and rats. Right now there's actually a professional on the island that's checking to see about the best way to approach the green iguana. The idea is to, as much as possible, eliminate the adult green iguanas, and that's the first step towards eradication. But that's a process that will take a few months to truly see the impact and how far along we're being able to successfully remove the green iguana. Second to that is with the feral cats. The first step there is to see exactly how big of a threat it is, and by using motion sensing cameras by bird nesting areas, they can make an assessment as to how big the feral cat population is, and then with traps they can try to trap as many as they can. And then lastly is with the rats, and that's more so using very specific type of techniques to eradicate the rats.
Just because I remember, I don't recall how long ago it was, but I remember that at one point there was a similar program, particularly for the cats.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how do we look at it from a sustainable perspective, and making sure that this doesn't occur in the future, because like with all these species control measures, it's we seem to do something once, and then a few years later we have to do it again, and then you kind of increase the concerns because people are always concerned about killing animals. Sure, call it what it is. And so I'm just curious, how do we look at making sure that it's they're ongoing programs rather than just you do it once and then it happens again, and then we do it again, and then just more and more concerns arise every time. But I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course, a very valid point. I mean, I remember years ago you would drive by the landfill at night, and we had lights, all you would see was eyes through the garbage. But you're indeed correct that we shouldn't just look at these as one-time programs, especially for things like the green iguana, rats, and cats. Because they do pose a significant risk. I mean, you wouldn't think so because they're small, but that's for sure an impact. But that's a discussion that I'm open to having with the group that's working on it, for sure.
Thank you.
Is there any more questions at this time pertaining to this point? No? Okay, just a bit of a change. So next we're going to do the agriculture program because Commissioner Hennigan needs to step up for urgent matter and then he'll return. So we'll address that one first. So, Mr. Charles, that was also your question?
Yeah. So when I read it's about an agriculture program that was it's going to be implemented in schools, I thought it was very interesting to see that, and I'd like to commend the Executive Council on this initiative. But it wasn't clear if it was a structured program or temporary. And so I'm just wondering whether the Executive Council can explain whether the program is structurally embedded in the curriculum of schools, and particularly, I'm just wondering if it will be structurally embedded in the schools, and in particular because I know at the CXC level there is a class on agricultural technology, and I'm just wondering if we are looking at bringing that class into the school, into the high school.
Well, initially this was a public entity initiative, and it was more seen as a pilot to see how it could work and how well it would be received by the students. The pilot ends, roughly the end of this year, but there seems to be real enthusiasm for it to continue. So there will be an evaluation period to see how it can be better structured to make it that it's more than just a pilot. The crew at the hydroponics really enjoyed having the kids there. The kids were very, open and truly enjoyed, being a part of that process. So as long as, for example, the schools are willing to continue, having the kids involved, we definitely see this as being something that we can, do for a longer period of time. But this was initially just a trial that ends in resulting. But there will be an evaluation period, and we also hope that it continues. As for the part with CXC, that's something that, that has to be a broader discussion on another level to see how we can actually incorporate that, officially into the curriculum.
Great, thank you. Are there any more questions on this agenda point? No? Then we can move on to the next one, which is subsidy transfer and import costs in animal feed. That was also Mr. Charles?
Oh, I decided not to ask the question now because it was also in the the third budget amendment.
Okay. And then the next one was building permit Lambert Castle Road, number 7.
Yes, thank you. And in regards to that, it appears that the building permit was submitted for this development after completion, or is approved after completion, because it's September 17th, I think the location opened early in September. So clearly building permit already, they had already done the work. So I'm just curious what the executive, if the executive council can explain what happens in cases when a building permit is not submitted ahead of construction. And particularly because I think this sends the wrong signal that it's okay to go ahead and do things and there are no repercussions.
Well, this is still a gray area, simply because, in the past it's never been, really any enforcement when people don't comply with the request that you need a building permit before you start the build. We've seen this happen, not just in this instance, but in many instances over the years. I do believe that, the planning department has been more on top of it to ensure that when they see something going on, that, people are urged to come in, hey, you have to apply for a building permit. So enforcement is definitely lacking in that area, and that's something that we have to put together to essentially make it work in practice, not just to say that you have something on paper and then, how do you go about implementing it. But from what I understand is that there's two measures that can be taken once, we get there, and that is by administrative enforcement, by, giving an instruction that, say for example, the structure doesn't meet certain standards, that they have to adhere to certain standards, or imposing a penalty. So that's something that's also within the toolbox that can be applied, but that has not happened in yet.
Thank you for explaining that. Of course, that creates a few more questions.
Obviously.
And I'm just, for instance, so like if someone, like on Saba, every time you do a build, you have to do an excavation, and that excavation could have an impact, for instance, on the hillside, the land. You could have, for instance, a discussion about the demolition at the property earlier.
Which is a good example.
Which is a good example. So
because there was no building permit.
No building permit. You just began demolition. They could have done excavation. So when can people start actually doing work on their property or on property? And how do we prevent them from? Because it's not about not going ahead and having any development, but it's doing it in a controlled manner. Because, for instance, one of the discussions I have with regularly is that there's no parking space on the island anymore, and if you have to include parking space in your building, but if you already are going ahead and you're building, and then we only can stop you, and then your building's already up and you don't have any parking space, then it doesn't make sense to say that you need to have parking space for your building. So there's a lot of issues that arise when people can begin construction without building permit, without taking into account what government thinks or what the regulations are regarding development. So I'm just wondering, how do we see ourselves countering that and addressing that, especially moving forward. There's more people on the island, more development, more homes required, and then you have all these elements that come together and create a lot of tension and concerns.
Well, the problem is that we're dealing with dated legislation or dated policy. So in the current policy, and you have a very valid point about excavating your land, you're not required to have a building permit until you actually start to build your house. So you can build a cistern, and by building a cistern, you normally have to excavate. I mean, that's the reality of living on Saba. But that doesn't require getting a building permit. So obviously that policy needs to be revised, and that's something that especially saying, things like what happened with the monument here in the bottom, or well, the so-called monument here in the bottom, I do believe that needs priority in the coming year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any follow-up questions? No? Okay. So that concludes that agenda point. We'll now move on to agenda point 6, which is Island Council Proposal 2024-27, Third Quarter Implementation Report and Third Budget Amendment 2024. Commissioner Zegers, you now have the floor.
Thank you. I'll be rather brief with this agenda point because this is not the first time that we're dealing with an amendment here in this council. This is basically reporting on the activities of the third quarter. There's no major shifts or anything of the sort in policy, so it still follows what had been agreed upon in the past. I would like to make mention what was mentioned, what was reported into the letter from the CFT, that the information seemed to be incomplete because it didn't take in consideration, for example, the money that was received from the NEPP or the interest on the bank account. However, as explained by the finance department, the budget amendment was already finalized, and then to incorporate this into the third amendment, that would have been pretty tedious to do. It meant changing all the tables. So it was agreed upon that, hey, let's keep the third budget amendment as is, and then we would just quickly do a fourth quarter amendment so that these funds simply wouldn't go towards the end of year balance. Had we not taken these into the fourth budget amendment or a fourth budget amendment, what would have happened is that like the interest, the money from the NEPP, all would have gone to the end of year balance. So that's the reason why there's a fourth quarter budget amendment here today, to safeguard that so that those funds can be allocated. Had it gone to the end of year balance, the only time that it could be allocated is when we do the year report, which is normally in June and July.
Thank you, Commissioner Zegers. And now look to council if you have any questions. And Councilmember Charles, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First question in regards to connectivity, on page 23. And it's mentioned that outstanding departure fees were deducted from advance payment to the ferry company. And then that, of course, there is some questions in regards to how we go about collection, which has been flagged by the CFT, and of course, the executive council said they're addressing it. So just curious, what was the amount owed in departure fees? And what is the policy in regards to the collection of departure fees? And in addition to that, I had another question where it comes to the agreement, because it is also mentioned in the new agreement that we signed by the end of October. Has this been completed? And if you know, why not? And what is the new target date for signing the agreement? Can I ask one question?
Do you want
Whatever's easier.
The next question is in regards to drinking water subsidy. And it's mentioned that the subsidy for the purchasing power package, I translated as different word in Dutch, has not been received as yet. When is anticipated that these subsidies will be received? Then there is the question, I was going to ask what feed in the decision list, but I asked instead here, and is the new subsidy program for affordable animal feed in place? And how many farmers have participated in this new subsidy program?
Is that
So, and usually the question regards to the CFT advice to the third budget amendment. And in the advice from the CFT is mentioned that the government should limit the use of designated reserves. And I remember in the second budget amendment there was quite a number of budget reserves. And the CFT says, well, we should significantly limit that, both the frequency and the amounts of designated reserves. So in line with that advice, I am just wondering what the executive council thinks, and if they agree with the advice of the CFT, and if they do or don't, do they intend to comply with the advice, and what is the alternative to not designating things specifically in specific reserve. And then fourth budget amendment.
Yes. As long as it's
All right.
very Commissioner, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. With regards to the first question about the connectivity, and in this case, the mechanical, the departure fees for the first half of the year was $58,000. And how that works with regards to the administrative side of it is that before the boat can leave, they have to have a passenger manifest. This is then processed by the harbor office, so they make a compilation of every departure, every manifest list at the end of each month, and then it's invoiced by the finance department. So there's checks and balances. Of course, the manifest has to be verified by immigration to ensure that those number of people actually on the list. Harbor Office makes an inventory of that, and then it's invoiced by the finance department. With regards to the PSO, on the request of Stacia, a deep dive was done into the numbers to see if the rates that were being charged were fair or not, and this was more so because of the $7 port fee that the ferry operator was saying that Stacia passengers should pay. That report was only received on November 8th. There still hasn't been a discussion about that report. And for me, the results of the report, like I just gave you an answer and you said I brought more questions. Well, the same can be said for that report. But there is a meeting next week, Tuesday, to discuss the report and also to discuss the next steps with regards to finalizing the PSO. So I do hope to have, that I can be, even informally, that I can share that next week as to when that agreement will be signed between the three parties. As for the drinking water subsidy, those funds were received on November 15th. With the feed program, there was still feed left from the previous system, which is being used by those that participate in the program. The reimbursement forms have been, are available and have been given to people that normally made use of the existing program or the older program. And so far, only one request has come in for reimbursement for shipping and gateway. As for the advice on the third budget amendment about using specific reserves, designated reserves, while I do agree with the advice of the CFD, right now we're very limited on what we can and cannot do. And because of that, that is why when we have surpluses, we tend to make money available for whether it's maintenance or infrastructure. We've had this discussion multiple times about Ida Versa and the level of the free allowance. Whereas, we've known for a long time that Ida Versa only focused on the administrative side of things and never give any real attention to what's needed for maintenance, for funding of projects, for infrastructure. That's something that's regretful. However, better late than never, there is a study that's ongoing to determine what the islands need to carry out maintenance, to bridge the gap for projects, to ensure that infrastructure is safe. We still don't know what the outcome of this study is. We also don't know what will happen with this result, because we've seen before that there's been studies created and then not much progress is made with them. But in any case, we have used reserves before, and willfully so, because we've created reserves that ensures that we can do maintenance to buildings, that we can address infrastructure concerns. Whereas had we just said, let those surpluses go to the general reserve, we would not have been able to do several of the projects that we're doing right now. And part of what this study, at least what they want the outcome of this study is that the public entities will have the ability to go to the commercial market for loans to carry out projects. And while this is an option that we don't have right now, it's one that I don't think is necessarily, it should be a last resort that we go to the commercial market when we have to, improve the administration building, for example. But yeah, we have to make use of the tools that we have, and although I agree with the advice of the CFD that we shouldn't make use of the reserves until there's a better option, that's basically all that we can make use of to ensure that buildings are maintained and roads are repaired. And CFD understands and realizes that as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Ziegler, are there follow-up questions?
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner. I really appreciate the clarity that you provided in your questions. My first question is because you asked a question about how much they had owed in regards to the departure fees, but my actual collection was a policy. So, for instance, I know in the aviation world, when you have, for instance, fees, airport fees, it's included in the ticket, and I think that's what's happening within Canada. But then you also have where the ones are collected in escrow, saved in escrow. So if and I forget the use a formula based on the passenger and so on and so on. And then that way, if you start paying, then they also have a mechanism to at least collect some money, then they can either stop you from flying or stop you from, or start making sure that you pay on a more regular basis. So, you didn't maybe say how often they are supposed to be, because if I look at the numbers, it means that I think they went 6 months without paying. So my question is, your collection policy, how often should we collect it from them? And also, are we looking at having an escrow account so that they can deposit money, so that if in case, because imagine you could have gone out of business tomorrow, half that money could be lost, you know. So how are we ensuring that the monies that are owed to the public entity are safeguarded?
Yes, you go ahead.
Well, currently there's no escrow account, and not saying that how one shouldn't be necessary, but until there's still a subsidy that's being dispersed by Saba and Stacia, there might not be a need for an escrow account. But yeah, we don't know what happens after next year, whether or not there will be a subsidy, and that's something then we should consider if an escrow account is really needed, because you're right, they can go out of business and then that's money that's owed because the departure fee is included into the ticket price. But what's happened now, each time that a subsidy payment has been made, the departure fees owed to both Saba and Stacia has been reduced first. So there is a mechanism that controls that they do pay their rightful dues at the moment. But after the subsidy period is ending, that's the end of next year, then yeah, we need to determine if we should have an escrow account or how we do that. And that applies the same for example, the Edge. But yeah, in almost 30 years, has never been an issue. So.
I think I agree, it has been an issue. I think one of the, if you look at the fact that there was a number of, you look at our collections, there were a lot of outstanding payments. I think we should have mechanisms for recognizing that not everybody is applies their obligations.
I agree.
Great, thank you, Mr. Charles. Are there any follow-up questions based on the, do you have more questions pertaining to this agenda point?
Well, this will be a fun agenda point because I had the fee and also all the reserves. Because you also mentioned that in regards to the fee, you mentioned only one farmer had taken advantage of made use of the program. I spoke to some farmers, so that's why I brought it up, and then they were saying that the program ended in their minds that it was done. So I'm not sure how it's being communicated to them that this is an alternative, or this is the alternative, and this is the way to go. Because they said that they thought it was good, and this program was in place, and now it's just difficult because food fee is expensive and so on and so on. So I don't know how it's being communicated, but I also realize it's, in general, sometimes, the bureaucracy is much more difficult for some people. And rather than, before when you had a program, you just simply went and picked up the fee. And that's easier than making, them have to do the paper. So they have to do the heavy lifting, whereas previously we had to do that.
What is the reason why the program changed? And there's for sure more than one side to the story. And what happened with the previous structure of the program is that persons would say, hey, are there so many bags of chicken feed and so many bags of pig feed, and just throwing out some examples. And containers would come in with these large quantities of feed, and then nothing would move because they would know that eventually the feed starts to get mold and stuff like that, and they would wait until that moment, and then be like, oh well, this feed is no good, so you have to sell it to me at half price. So that's not everything that you hear, not everything that glitters is gold. But that is also a part of this problem. And maybe the story is that, well, they're not in tune to the new procedures, and I find that hard to believe because I know everyone that's purchased feed in the past received their reimbursement forms and were explained how the procedure works. But they also look at, hey, I can't take advantage of it anymore, like how it was being done in the past. So, not nice to talk about these things, but this also happens.
I think it's good that you mention it because if you read the documents, it's not clear why he chose to go this new route. And I think, by you explaining that, it's clear why that had to happen. And I do hope, because, when we talk about food security, we recognize animal husbandry is important. And I hope that they take advantage of the program. And that we need to, we talk about working with people to ensure success. And maybe that's something we need to do. Of course, we shouldn't have people trying to take advantage of the government. But we need to work along with all the stakeholders and all the various programs to make sure that the idea or the reality of food security does happen. So it's a success for the site.
For sure.
Thank you. For one more.
I have another question in regards to the general reserve. You could mention that an alternative would be the commercial sector. So, because you said if you don't allocate it, if you don't create these designated reserves, then it has to go to general reserve. And if it goes to general reserve, then I guess
It goes into that gray area.
it's lost. You can't just take it back out unless it's some significant reason to do that.
Correct.
But then you mentioned going the commercial route. But I remember, and I don't know if that means going to commercial banks. But then I remember at one point we spoke about the Jamaica Fund, which is a bank or some sort of financial institution that loaned to municipalities in the Netherlands. And
There's also a commercial aspect to that.
okay. So that is also an alternative in the commercial sector.
Yes.
But of course, I think what you mentioned is clear that we would prefer not to have the commercial route if unnecessary. And I appreciate that you also think that because we don't need to indebt people unnecessarily.
For sure.
Great, thank you, Island Councilmember Charles, and thank you, Commissioner Zegers. At this time, I'm going to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes for a bathroom break, and then we'll resume right after. Meeting adjourned. We will now resume with the meeting. The agenda point we work on is Item Council Proposal 2024.7, Third Quarter Implementation Report and Third Budget Amendment 2024. Before adjourning the meeting, Island Council Member Charles gave his questions and his responses. At this time, I would like to ask if there's any follow-up questions to the responses given by him. No? Are there any more questions in general? No? Can we conclude that this agenda point will be a hammer piece, or does it need to remain a discussion piece for the Island Council meeting? Good. Okay, so we concluded that the Island Council Proposal 2024.7, Third Quarter Implementation Report and Third Budget Amendment 2024 will be a hammer piece for the Island Council meeting. We now move on to agenda point number 7, which is Island Council Proposal 2024, the fourth budget amendment 2024. Commissioner Zegers, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Lady. As I mentioned during my small introduction about the third quarter amendment, this is an extraordinary one, which is necessary to bring in the funds of mainly the funds of the NEPP, and also the interest on the bank account, which is the first public entity has never received. Well, none of the public entities have never received such funds. That's been an ongoing discussion between the CFT and the banks, now for several years. So, this is a positive development, to say the least. But this amendment is really possible to ensure that these funds can be allocated and that they just don't go towards the end of year reserve.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Zegers. At this time, is there any questions from Island Council members? I first go to Island Council Member Charles.
Yeah. So in the discussion, the elaboration in the document is mentioned that the budget amendment is primarily to incorporate interest in accounting special grants into the budget. Wondering what will be done with the income from the interest. And it is also mentioned the first time when you spoke a little bit in the introduction, there is interest from the bank account. And because you mentioned that there was discussion with banks and so on, that how maybe you could elaborate a bit more on what that was like, because I'm sure that there would have been interest in previous years. What happened to that? Where is that now? It's dissipated into the bureaucracy. And can we maybe see if we can claim some of that interest that has been lost over the last years? Because sometimes if you didn't file your year reports and so on, you still have to go ahead and file them. So I do think that it's a loss to the island if money is in fact being lost.
You can go to Commissioner Zegers.
All right, thank you. As for how the interest money will be allocated, 200,000 will go towards the Where Stunts Promoting, and that brings us to the 2.6 million amount that had been agreed upon with the CFT. So we've reached the desired amount for that. I think that's a positive development. And then going back to the discussion in the previous amendment, the remaining 1.6 will go towards maintenance and infrastructure reserves that can be used for projects, whether it be maintenance or gaps for bigger projects. But that's the idea, because the reality is that there's no other type of solutions to fill those gaps. Something to note on that end is that before these reserves can really be released, it has to go through the Island Council, so that there's a mechanism that controls how these reserves are being utilized. With regards to the discussion with the banks and the interest, I think one point that needs to be made clear, and this is one of the aspects of financial supervision, is that the bank accounts are actually being managed by the CFT. Daily amounts are being dispersed to the islands, and then based on those amounts, expenditures can be made. For example, at the end of each month, large amounts are dispersed, that salaries can be paid. By saying that, you know, this is a discussion that has mainly been between the CFD and the banks as the main account holders, because the majority of money sits onto those accounts. That's a discussion that I necessarily haven't been privy to, but that's something that, yeah, probably we need to have a bigger discussion about, and perhaps even with the CFD, because I fully agree with your position that, you know, we have this amount of money now, but what about the previous years? And, you know, I've heard this come from the executive councils of the other islands before, when talking about the CFD and the role and the banks and their interest, because, yeah, if it's 1.8 million now, you know, multiply that by several years, we're talking about a large amount of money. However, we do need to manage our expectations moving forward. You know, a lot of this interest is based on large amount of money that's allocated towards projects. For example, you know, when the Hara project starts, you know, a lot of that money gets dispersed, and then there's no longer interest to be made on those funds anymore. So it's 1.8 now, but I don't expect it to be as high as that moving forward.
I had a question in regards to the reserves, because you said no, we have reached the limit.
Well, not necessarily the limit, the threshold.
Right. We reached the threshold, which is good to hear, because it's like, as long as I can remember, not even before I was in the island council, I can remember discussions about their general reserves. But then, of course, now there's a question: what happens to surpluses in the future? Maybe not have completely time to have that full discussion, but maybe it would be good to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, with surpluses, there's, you know, always room for allocation towards, you know, whether it be a building reserve or a maintenance reserve, or even towards a project that an island council would want to see be realized. Those are discussions that, you know, we need to have once we know that will be a surplus. You know, I don't believe it's wise that, you know, at this stage where we are still developing, that, you know, everything should just go towards the general reserve. You know, we still lack, you know, critical infrastructure on the island. You know, there's still policies that need attention. So I do believe there has to be room for that, you know, in the event when there is a surplus.
Does that conclude your questions, Mr. Charles? Does any of the other island council members have any follow-up questions? No? Is there any other questions? No? So again, I ask, could we conclude that this is a hammer piece for the island council meeting, or does it need to remain a discussion piece? Okay, so we decided that the Island Council Proposal 204.8 for Budget Amendment 2024 will be a hammer piece for the Island Council meeting. And that brings us to our last agenda point, which is closing. So today we covered 8 points in the agenda. The conclusions were made that the 2 proposals will be a hammer piece for the next meeting. So at this time, I would like to thank you for joining the Central Committee meeting of today, December 4th, 2024. After closing, we'll probably take just 5 minutes, and then we will start with the Island Council meeting, where other points will be discussed. Also, before closing, I would like to take this opportunity to wish all Sabans on Saba and all around the world, and everyone that calls Saba home, a happy advanced Saba Day. I hope you all come out and show our Saban pride. So happy Saba Day. Thank you again for joining us, and have a pleasant day further. Meeting closed.